I want to share with you a little bit about God's creation and his plan for people. Now, God is a big, awesome, and powerful God. In fact, he's so powerful that he can make things happen simply by speaking. Long, long ago, when the world first began, there was no sun, there were no stars, there was no electricity, there was only darkness. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And in the same way God created light, he created the sky and everything we see in it, and the earth and everything we see in it. And God saw that his creation was good. Then God wanted to create people in his image. So out of the dirt from the ground, he formed a man. And then God breathed life into that man, and the man was alive. And that man's name was Adam. And God thought this was very good. But God also knew it wasn't good for Adam to be alone on the earth. So God created woman. And this woman's name was Eve, and he gave Eve to Adam to be his wife. And Adam and Eve lived in the Garden of Eden. And the Garden of Eden was this perfect place. There was nothing bad at all. They had everything they needed. They were safe, and they could even walk among the wild animals and be safe because everything was in harmony and everything was perfect. Now, God gave Adam and Eve just two rules. The first rule was to populate the earth by having many children, and the second rule was that they were not allowed to eat the fruit from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. God told them if they did this, they would die. Now, one thing that makes people above the animals is the fact that people can make choices. This is called free will. Animals, on the other hand, are governed by instinct. They can only do what God's designed them to do. So, for example, a bee can only build one kind of home. It can only build the kind of home that God designed it to make, which is a beehive. People, on the other hand, can build any kind of house they dream up. It may shelter them properly, it may not shelter them properly, but people get to choose what kind of house they want to live in or what kind of house they want to build. God also gave us the choice to obey God or disobey God. And disobeying God is not a good thing. So anyway, one day, a serpent came to Eve, and the serpent was a liar. And he told Eve that it was okay to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, that she wouldn't die, but in fact she would be like God. So Eve listened to the serpent, and she saw that the fruit looked good to eat, and she wanted to have that godlike wisdom. So she listened to the serpent, and she ate the fruit, and she shared it with Adam. And when they ate this fruit, they realized they were naked. Now that's okay, because back then they didn't really need clothes. The weather was perfect. They were never too hot. They were never too cold. Clothes were just not needed. But Adam and Eve realized they were naked, and they were ashamed. And then they hid from God. This was the first sin. And because of this sin, that sin nature was passed down to all the people who came after Adam and Eve. Just as there are consequences for you disobeying your parents, people also have consequences when they disobey God. Now, when God found out that the serpent had deceived Eve, he cursed the serpent and caused the serpent to have to crawl on his belly and eat dirt for the rest of his life. And the consequences for Adam and Eve disobeying God was they had to leave the Garden of Eden. They had to leave this perfect paradise. And the reason for that is because their sin is dirty, and it would make the Garden of Eden dirty also. So they had to leave the Garden of Eden. Now, once they left the Garden of Eden, the food was not just readily available to them. They had to work to grow their food and to keep things like weeds and thorns from destroying the food they were trying to grow. So now it was work to have to eat. And Eve was also told that when she had children, it would be very painful. So those were the consequences for disobedience. The good news is that even though they disobeyed God, God still loved them. He loved them a lot. He loved them just as much after the sin as they did before the sin. And so God made Adam and Eve clothes so they didn't have to be naked. And he also made a promise to Eve, and that promise was that one day one of her descendants would crush the head of the serpent. Sin had become a big problem in the world. And sin keeps people separated from God. This is because God is pure, he's holy, and sin is dirty. And so what is holy cannot be joined with what is dirty. One way to set an example of that is this bottle of water. It's nice and clear and pretty. This represents God. And this food coloring represents sin. Just one little bit of sin, one drop. Now we don't have pure water anymore. And the only thing that can clean that up is the Holy Spirit. But anyway, so God loved the people so much, he didn't want the separation. So he has a plan to fix the problem of sin. And he did this through Abraham. God promised to make Abraham the father of a great nation. And this means that as Abraham has children, and those children have children, and so on, those children are going to be great leaders, and great things are going to come from them. And Abraham wondered how this was going to happen, because Abraham was already old. He was like in his 80s, both he and his wife. And so he's like, I don't have any children. How am I going to be a great nation? But he believed God. It wasn't easy, but he did. And when Abraham was 100 years old, his son, Isaac, was born. And through the birth of Isaac, an even bigger promise is fulfilled. Isaac's birth was not the end of the story. It was just the beginning. Isaac's children and his grandchildren were all part of God's bigger plan to redeem his people. But of course, God's people had to be prepared first. This was not something that could happen just overnight. In the same way, if you were going to plan a trip to go to Disneyland, you wouldn't just wake up one day and jump in the car and go. It takes planning, it takes preparation. So, for the people to get from where they were to this final plan of redemption, steps had to be taken. Now, one of those steps came through Moses. God's people, the Israelites, had been taken captive by the Egyptians, and the Egyptians were mean to the Israelites, and they made them slaves. And God heard the Israelites cry out, so God appeared to Moses, and God told Moses to go rescue the Israelites and bring them into a land described as flowing with milk and honey. And this was the promised land. And Moses did as he was told. He went to Egypt. He argued with Pharaoh, who was the leader to set the slaves free, and eventually the slaves were set free. But because the Israelites were not obedient and they kept messing up, what should have taken a few days to get from Egypt to the promised land wound up taking 40 years. But God was with them the whole time. God provided for them the whole time, and God loved them the whole time. Eventually, it was a man named Joshua who led the people into the promised land. And throughout the Old Testament, we see situations where God continues to love his people, and he continues to have mercy on them. However, the people could never, and we can never be good enough to be right with God. So God knew that something more had to happen. And so he made a promise to the people that a virgin would give birth to a baby boy, and that baby's boy's name would be Emmanuel, which means God is with us. And we know Emmanuel is Jesus, because Jesus, even though he came to earth as a baby, as a human baby, he was also God. He was fully God and fully man. And Jesus as God is with us. So Emmanuel, God is with us, and that's who Jesus is. And it's because of Jesus that people can be fully redeemed. The fourth and final phase of our salvation journey is the new creation. When we give our life to Jesus, we become a new creation in him. All the sin of our past is forgiven, and we're made new. So it's like we're born all over again. Also, when we get to the book of Revelation, we learn what will happen next. The promise made to Eve will be fulfilled. Jesus, who is a descendant of Eve, will destroy Satan, who was the serpent or the deceiver, the one that convinced Eve to eat the apple. Or not the apple, the fruit. I